see you later?
Well, it all depends on how much vitamin E I can get my hands on.
Some of the greatest films ever made started life as ideas that nobody took seriously. Studios doubted them, critics laughed at them, and then audiences sat down, watched them, and never forgot them. These are the 10 silly movies from the 70s that became masterpieces. Number 10, Blazing Saddles, 1974. The pitch must have been something to witness. Mel Brooks wanted to make a Western that was also a comedy, that was also a pointed piece of social commentary about race in America, that was also a film in which the characters would eventually break through the fourth wall and end up on a studio lot.
Town ladies sing this song, doo-dar, doo-dar.
In 1974, Warner Brothers greenlit it anyway, and the result was one of the most recklessly funny films the decade produced. Cleavon Little played Sheriff Bart, a black man appointed sheriff of a frontier town called Rock Ridge by a corrupt politician who assumes the townspeople will riot and abandon the land, making it easier to seize. Gene Wilder played the Waco Kid, a once legendary gunslinger now too fond of whiskey to be a threat to anybody. Together, they anchored a film that moved at a pace that made it almost impossible to catch every joke on a first viewing, which is part of why people kept going back. Mel Brooks directed and co-wrote the screenplay alongside Richard Pryor, Andrew Bergman, Norman Steinberg, and Alan Euger. Pryor's influence on the script, particularly in the characterization of Sheriff Bart and the film's willingness to confront racism directly rather than dancing around it, was significant.
Hey, maybe you should eat something first.
No, thanks. Food makes me sick.
And Brooks acknowledged it openly. The supporting cast was equally sharp. Harvey Korman played Hedley Lamar, the scheming attorney general, with a relish that made even his most cartoonish moments land. Slim Pickens played his dim enforcer, Taggart. Madeline Kahn played Lily von Stoop, a saloon singer clearly modeled on Marlene Dietrich, and earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress for a performance in a broad comedy, which was itself a statement about how good she actually was. The film was rejected by many critics on first release as too crude, too chaotic, too willing to tear down the conventions it was supposedly celebrating. It was a massive box office hit regardless, earning over $119 million worldwide against a budget of approximately $2.6 million.
Good morning, ma'am. And isn't it a lovely morning?
Up your
Over time, the critical view shifted, and Blazing Saddles is now regularly cited as one of the great American comedies, a film that used silliness as a delivery mechanism for things that actually needed to be said. Number 9, Young Frankenstein, 1974. The same year as Blazing Saddles, Mel Brooks released a second film that worked in an entirely different register. Quieter, more carefully constructed, shot entirely in black and white as a deliberate homage to the universal horror films of the 1930s that it was simultaneously parodying and loving. Gene Wilder plays Dr. Frederick Frankenstein, grandson of the infamous Victor,
Dr. Frankenstein.
who has spent his career trying to distance himself from his family's reputation and now finds himself, against his better judgment, at the old Frankenstein castle in Transylvania. Peter Boyle played the monster. Marty Feldman played Igor, the hunchbacked assistant, with a physical comedy instinct that was completely his own. Cloris Leachman played the terrifying Frau Blucher. Madeline Kahn played Elizabeth, Frederick's fiancée. Terry Garr played Inga, his assistant. Kenneth Mars played Inspector Kemp. The ensemble was extraordinary, and Brooks gave them room. The film was co-written by Brooks and Gene Wilder, and Wilder's contribution to the script brought a sincerity to the material that made the comedy land harder than it would have otherwise. The jokes work because the character actually believes what he's doing. Frederick Frankenstein is not in on the joke. He is the joke. and Wilder played that completely straight.
Good night, darling.
Good night, Frau Blucher.
Shot on the original laboratory equipment used in the 1931 Universal Frankenstein film, which Brooks tracked down and had shipped to the set. The film has a visual authenticity that most parodies never bother to achieve. It was a commercial success and is now considered one of the finest comedies in American cinema. Number 8, Animal House, 1978. Before Animal House, the college comedy as a genre essentially did not exist in its current form. After Animal House, it became one of the most reliable templates in Hollywood, and virtually none of the films that followed matched the original. National Lampoon's Animal House was directed by John Landis and produced by Ivan Reitman.
Listen, you two talk while I get some punch for us, okay? Good idea, all right.
Based on a screenplay by Harold Ramis, Douglas Kenney, and Chris Miller that drew on their own experiences at American colleges and universities in the 1960s. It was shot at the University of Oregon in 1977 on a budget of $3 million and returned nearly $141 million at the domestic box office, making it one of the highest-grossing comedies in history up to that point. John Belushi played John Bluto Blutarsky, a fifth-year student of spectacular academic failure and equally spectacular personal energy, in a performance that ran almost entirely on physical instinct and timing. Belushi had almost no conventional dialogue to work with.
Holy shit! There were blanks in that gun!
What he had was a camera that followed him, and the intelligence to understand exactly what to do in front of it. The cafeteria scene alone, in which he demolishes an enormous plate of food and then performs a one-man impersonation of a pimple, lasted seconds and required no words at all. The rest of the cast included Tim Matheson as the smooth otter, Tom Holtz as the earnest pinto, Stephen Furst as the gentle flounder, and Donald Sutherland as the English professor whose class nobody attends and who is quietly the most interesting person in every scene he inhabits. Karen Allen appeared in one of her earlier film roles. The film arrived in theaters in July 1978 and immediately became a cultural event. Reviewers who were over 30 mostly hated it. Audiences mostly didn't care. It entered the permanent record of American film comedy almost immediately and has stayed there. The language it introduced, the toga party, the road trip.
No, don't worry, just keep your hands and feet away from his mouth.
Don't you have any respect for yourself?
The chaotic climax at the homecoming parade became the shared vocabulary of a genre that has never entirely stopped producing films. None of them have matched it, which is the kind of legacy most films never come close to establishing. Number 7, The Jerk, 1979. Steve Martin had been one of the most successful stand-up comedians in America through the mid to late 1970s, selling out arenas and becoming genuinely famous at a speed that was unusual even then. What he wanted to do with that fame was make a film. What he made with director Carl Reiner in 1979 was a film that many people assumed would be a disaster.
Hey, that would be interesting for me. No one has tried to guess my weight.
The Jerk starred Martin as Navin R. Johnson, a man of staggering naivety who was raised by a black family in Mississippi and grows up genuinely unaware that he is not black himself. He leaves home as a young man to seek his fortune, passes through a series of escalating misadventures, accidentally invents a product that makes him extraordinarily wealthy, and then loses everything in a lawsuit. The film was written by Steve Martin, Carl Gottlieb, and Michael Elias, and its comedy operated on a very particular frequency: the absolute sincerity of its central character. Navin is not stupid. He is simply without any protective layer of cynicism or self-awareness, which makes every situation he enters both funnier and oddly moving.
Damn these glasses, son!
Yes, sir. I damn thee.
Bernadette Peters played Marie, his love interest, with a warmth that grounded the film's more absurdist moments. Critics were uncertain. The New York Times called it cheerfully inane. Audiences disagreed strongly, and the film earned over $73 million against a budget of $4 million. The supporting cast included Emmett Walsh, Jackie Mason, and a cameo from Carl Reiner himself, and the film moved through its comic set pieces with a confidence that suggested everyone involved knew exactly what kind of film they were making, even if the critics hadn't figured it out yet. It launched Steve Martin's film career in earnest and has aged into something that feels more considered and more specifically crafted than its original reception suggested. The physical comedy, the deadpan sincerity, the willingness to let a joke breathe rather than rushing to the next one.
When I was a kid, my mom told me that was my special purpose, and someday I'd find out what that special purpose was.
All of it holds together in a way that rewards watching more than once. Martin has described the film in interviews as the closest thing to a pure expression of his comedic instincts that he produced in those years, and it shows. Number 6, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, 1975. By 1975, Monty Python's Flying Circus had already completed its run on the BBC, and the group had established itself as the most influential comedy ensemble in British television history. The feature film they made on a budget of approximately £200,000, cobbled together partly through donations from rock musicians including members of Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, was so economically restricted that they could not afford horses, which is why King Arthur and his knights ride imaginary horses while their servants clap coconut shells together.
For no man.
So be it!
That restriction became one of the most recognizable jokes in the film. What could have been a limitation became a running gag that the film built on and deepened until the coconuts were as much a part of the fabric of the story as anything else. The film follows King Arthur, played by Graham Chapman, as he assembles the Knights of the Round Table and sets off in search of the Holy Grail. What follows is a series of increasingly absurdist encounters. The Black Knight, who refuses to accept defeat even as he loses limbs. The Knights who say knee, the Bridge of Death.
Right, I'll do you for that. You what? Come here. What are you gonna do, bleed on me?
The Killer Rabbit of Caerbannog, the French soldiers lobbing insults from the castle walls. That individually might read as sketches, but accumulate into something with genuine comic momentum. Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones co-directed, dividing the work in a way that suited both their temperaments. Jones handled the actors and the performances. Gilliam handled the visual compositions and the animated sequences that had become one of the group's signatures. John Cleese, Michael Palin, Eric Idle, and Terry Gilliam each played multiple roles, often switching characters between scenes in a way that the film cheerfully acknowledges without ever quite explaining. The film was released in the United Kingdom in April 1975 and in the United States in May of the same year.
I don't want to waste any more of your time, but I don't suppose you could tell us where we might find
where it became a significant cult success, particularly on college campuses, where it played in midnight screenings for years. It has never left. People who were 18 when the film came out are now in their late 60s, and they can still recite entire sections of it from memory. That kind of retention is not an accident. It is what happens when comedy is constructed with enough precision that every element reinforces every other element, and the whole thing becomes something you can carry around inside your head. The budget was eventually pushed slightly above £200,000 by the time production wrapped, which still made it one of the cheapest films on this list by a considerable margin. It earned more than $5 million in the United States alone. Number 5, Smokey and the Bandit, 1977. Not everything on this list built its reputation slowly. Smokey and the Bandit was a massive hit the moment it opened in the summer of 1977.
Strange thing.
It was the second highest grossing film of the year in America, behind only Star Wars, but it was dismissed almost universally by critics as disposable entertainment for audiences who didn't know any better. The film was directed by Hal Needham, a former stuntman making his directorial debut, and starred Burt Reynolds as the Bandit, a professional driver hired to transport 400 cases of Coors beer from Texarkana to Atlanta in 28 hours. This was a real cultural reference point at the time. Coors was not sold east of the Mississippi, which made it a genuine contraband item in parts of the country. Jackie Gleason played Sheriff Buford T. Justice in Pursuit. Sally Field played Carrie, who joins the Bandit after fleeing her own wedding.
Fred! Don't look at me like that, Fred. Fred!
The chemistry between Reynolds and Field was entirely genuine. They were in a real relationship during filming, and it gave the film a warmth that its plot, such as it was, could not have provided on its own. Gleason's performance as Justice was a masterclass in committed comic villainy, a man so consumed by indignation that every scene he was in became funnier simply because he was present in it. Mike Henry played Buford's son Jr., who rode alongside his father through the chase with the resigned expression of someone who has long since accepted his circumstances. The film cost approximately $4.3 million to make and earned nearly $127 million worldwide.
Well, what are you talking about? I'm telling you. Let me tell you something about that.
Hal Needham, the former stuntman making his directorial debut, understood car chases the way most directors understand dialogue, from the inside, with a specific and practiced knowledge of what worked and why. The stunts in Smokey and the Bandit were performed by real drivers at real speeds, which is visible on screen in a way that no amount of digital enhancement can replicate. Critics eventually came around, slowly and sometimes reluctantly. The film is now recognized as one of the defining movies of its specific cultural moment, a document of a particular American attitude in the late 1970s that has not been replicated since, partly because the conditions that produced it no longer exist. Number 4, Murder by Death, 1976. This one requires a little more context, because it has faded further than most of the others on this list, and deserves considerably better.
Mr. Twain has macabre sense of humor, yeah?
Murder by Death was written by Neil Simon, the playwright responsible for The Odd Couple, Barefoot in the Park, and The Sunshine Boys, and directed by Robert Moore. It starred an ensemble cast of extraordinary range: Peter Falk, Alec Guinness, Peter Sellers, Maggie Smith, David Niven, Eileen Brennan, James Coco, Elsa Lanchester, and Nancy Walker. The film was a parody of the classic detective mystery genre, gathering thinly disguised versions of famous fictional detectives, including characters clearly based on Hercule Poirot, Sam Spade, Charlie Chan, Miss Marple, and Nick and Nora Charles, for a dinner party at which their host announces that a murder will occur at midnight and challenges them to solve it.
Point 4, wine poisoned.
The comedy operated on 2 levels simultaneously. On the surface, it was a broad send-up of mystery conventions: the isolated country house, the eccentric host, the gathering of suspects, the solution that nobody anticipated. Underneath that, it was a much more specific piece of work, skewering the particular tics and mannerisms of each detective archetype with enough precision that you had to actually know the source material for the jokes to fully land. The screenplay was dense with references and callbacks that rewarded an audience that had grown up reading Agatha Christie and Dashiell Hammett.
How did you know?
Never underestimate a Frenchman's nostrils, Miss Twain.
Truman Capote played the eccentric host Lionel Twain in his only significant film acting role, and he was remarkably good. Arch, strange, and entirely committed. Peter Sellers played Sidney Wang, the Charlie Chan parody, with the total physical transformation he brought to every role he accepted. Maggie Smith and David Niven played Dick and Dora Charleston, the Nick and Nora Charles equivalents, and their easy, affectionate bickering was some of the warmest comedy in the film. The film opened to mixed reviews and decent box office, then disappeared. It holds up very well, and for anyone who grew up watching old mystery films on weekend television, it plays like an act of genuine affection rather than mockery. Number 3, The In-Laws, 1979. The In-Laws is perhaps the least remembered film on this list, and that is genuinely difficult to explain once you have seen it. Directed by Arthur Hiller from a screenplay by Andrew Bergman,
Now, Vince, you're very sweet.
Vince!
who had also co-written Blazing Saddles. The film starred Peter Falk as Vince Ricardo, a man who may or may not be a CIA operative, and Alan Arkin as Sheldon Cornpet, a mild-mannered Manhattan dentist whose daughter is about to marry Vince's son. In the days before the wedding, Vince drags Sheldon into a series of increasingly dangerous and bewildering situations involving stolen treasury plates, a Central American dictator, and a level of casual chaos that Sheldon is absolutely not equipped to handle. The film is a two-hander, essentially. It lives or dies on the chemistry between Falk and Arkin, and the chemistry is perfect. Falk's Vince operates entirely on unshakable confidence.
God, you could almost reach out and touch him. That's the tip-off to a great work of art.
Whatever happens, he is always about to explain why it is fine and why Sheldon should stop worrying. Arkin's Sheldon is worrying. He is doing nothing but worrying, and his ability to convey the specific texture of a sensible man being pulled through insensible events is some of the finest comedic acting of the decade. The film received positive reviews on release, did reasonable business, and then essentially vanished from the cultural conversation. A remake was produced in 2003 with Michael Douglas and Albert Brooks, which performed poorly and is remembered mainly as evidence that the original was better. If you have not seen the 1979 version, it is the one worth finding. Number 2, What's Up, Doc? 1972. Peter Bogdanovich directed this one at the height of his powers, immediately after The Last Picture Show in 1971 and just before Paper Moon in 1973. What's Up, Doc? Was a deliberate throwback to the screwball comedies of the 1930s and 1940s. The Hawks and Capra films, the Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn pictures, made it a moment when that kind of comedy had been out of fashion for decades. Barbra Streisand played Judy Maxwell, a chaotic, brilliant, catastrophically disruptive force of nature who attaches herself to a mild-mannered musicologist named Howard Bannister, played by Ryan O'Neal, who is in San Francisco for a musicology conference and would very much prefer that nothing unusual happen to him. The film centers on 4 identical plaid overnight bags, each belonging to a different person and each containing something different. Howard's igneous rocks, Judy's personal belongings, a set of classified government documents, and stolen jewels.
Howard, I've asked Eunice to stay on with me for a few days.
In separate quarters, of course.
Of course.
That get repeatedly mixed up in increasingly complicated ways. The film was shot on location in San Francisco and included a chase sequence through the city's hills, involving bicycles, a laundry cart, a sheet of glass, and a Chinese dragon parade that remains one of the better set pieces of its kind. The sequence took weeks to film and was choreographed with the kind of physical precision that Bogdanovich had absorbed from studying the comedies he was paying tribute to. Madeline Kahn appeared in one of her earliest film roles as Eunice Burns, Howard's fiancée, a woman of iron propriety and considerable fury, and the performance already showed everything that would make her one of the most consistently funny performers of the decade.
Howard, you know what I'm talking about. After all, you are a man.
Yes, that's true.
She is a woman.
Yes, that's true.
The film earned approximately $28 million domestically, making it one of the top-grossing films of 1972. It has aged gracefully and rewards watching even now. Number 1. Silver Streak, 1976. Silver Streak is remembered today, if it is remembered at all, primarily as the film that first paired Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor on screen together. That pairing is remembered because it was so good that they made 3 more films together afterward. What is sometimes forgotten is that the first film itself was genuinely excellent. Directed by Arthur Hiller, the same director who would later make The In-Laws, and written by Colin Higgins, Silver Streak followed George Caldwell, played by Gene Wilder, a mild-mannered book editor traveling by train from Los Angeles to Chicago, who witnesses what appears to be a murder and spends the rest of the journey trying to convince anyone who will listen that something has gone wrong. Richard Pryor entered the film in its second half as Grover Muldoon, a small-time thief who becomes George's unlikely ally. The film worked as a thriller and as a comedy simultaneously, which is harder than it sounds. Colin Higgins' screenplay understood that the comedy was more effective when the danger was real, when George was actually in trouble, not just inconvenienced. The train setting gave the story a physical containment that made the escalating stakes feel genuine rather than manufactured, and Hiller shot the location footage on actual Amtrak trains running between Los Angeles and Chicago.
All right, ace of deuce. That's Bandit, man. You're looking good.
Which gave the film a texture and an authenticity that studio-built sets could not have matched. The Wilder-Pryor chemistry was immediate and apparently natural. Wilder's controlled, anxious energy and Pryor's improvisational looseness created a dynamic that felt entirely unforced. Both actors spoke warmly about the working relationship in interviews over the years. The success of the pairing was obvious enough that they returned for Stir Crazy in 1980, which was directed by Sidney Poitier and became an even larger commercial success. The film earned over $30 million domestically against a modest budget and launched one of the more enjoyable comedy partnerships the decade produced. One that began here, on a train, in a film that most people have half forgotten.
Oh, thank you, sir. I tell the boys in the kitchen we aims to please. Coffee, miss?
No, thanks.
10 films, all of them arrived looking like they might not amount to much. Too broad, too silly, too cheerfully unserious to be taken as anything other than entertainment for a Friday night when nothing better was available. And then time passed, and it turned out they were something more than that. The 1970s had an unusual appetite for comedy that took risks. Studios were willing to greenlight things that were strange. Directors were willing to push material further than conventional wisdom suggested they should. Writers were allowed to be specific and strange and personal in ways that the more committee-driven studio system of later decades would have smoothed out of existence. And audiences were willing to show up for something they hadn't quite seen before without knowing in advance whether it was going to work. The combination produced films that are still watched and still funny 50 years later, which is the only test that actually matters. Jokes that require explanation are dead. Situations that need context stop being funny. But the best of what these 10 films contain, the timing, the performances, the specific way a scene was put together, still lands the way it was designed to land. That is not nostalgia doing the work. That is craft. Some of these films you may have seen so many times that you have stopped actually watching them, which means it might be time to go back. Others you may be hearing about for the first time here, which is a genuinely good position to be in. All of them are worth your time. If you enjoyed this video, Please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.